When the group of tourists arrived in London, they felt as if they had stepped inside a picture from a travel magazine. The air was filled with the sounds of buses, street performers, and excited travelers speaking different languages. The city felt alive, bright, and full of endless things to explore. Many in the group had dreamed of visiting London for years, and now they could finally say they were here, standing among famous places they had only seen on TV or online. This group was a mix of friends, co-workers, and cousins who had planned the trip months in advance. They were cheerful people who wanted to make the most of every moment. Some were fascinated by history, some loved taking photos, and some were simply happy to spend time together in a new place. But among them were 2 or 3 people who had a habit of acting silly whenever they were excited. They loved making jokes, trying funny challenges, and recording everything for social media. They didn't usually mean harm most of the time. They just wanted to make each other laugh. But sometimes, without thinking, they pushed their jokes a little too far. During the first 2 days of their trip, everything went smoothly. They visited the London Eye, rode on the famous red buses, took pictures of Big Ben, and enjoyed warm pastries from small shops along the streets. They laughed a lot, took hundreds of photos, and promised that this would be the best trip of their lives. On the morning of the 3rd day, the group decided to visit Buckingham Palace. It was something everyone wanted to see. They woke up early, dressed nicely, and checked their maps to make sure they didn't get lost on the way. As they walked toward the palace, one of the tourists named Sam noticed something on their guidebook. A picture of a royal guard stood proudly on the page, wearing a bright red coat and a tall black hat. Sam smiled and said, "I've always wanted to see one of these guards in real life. They look so serious." His friends immediately became curious. They had seen videos online before the guards standing perfectly still, never smiling, never moving, no matter what happened around them. To the tourists, it seemed impressive and almost magical. It made them eager to see it for themselves. When they reached the palace area, the place was full of visitors. People were taking photos, pointing at the grand gates, and admiring the palace from every angle. The building looked like something from a fairy tale, with beautiful walls, golden details, and a large open space in front. And yes, right there near the entrance stood the famous royal guards. They were exactly as the tourists imagined: straight posture, calm faces, and no sign of distraction. The guards stood as still as statues, their uniforms perfectly neat, their boots shining under the sun. The tourists were amazed. Some whispered, some took quiet photos, and some simply stared in respect. But for the playful members of the group, it felt like an irresistible opportunity to try out their humor. "There he is," one of them said with a grin. "The real guard. Imagine if we could make him blink or smile." A few others laughed. They didn't think about rules or traditions. To them, it felt like a harmless idea, something fun to do during a vacation. They didn't understand that the guard was not a performer or an entertainer, but a soldier doing a serious job. The rest of the group didn't want trouble. One of the older cousins said gently, "Maybe don't do anything silly here. This is a special place. We should show respect." But the playful tourists waved off the warning. "Oh, relax," Sam said lightly. "We aren't doing anything wrong. We're just looking. Everyone is watching the guards." Even though Sam's voice was calm, his eyes sparkled with that familiar mischievous excitement, the same kind he showed whenever he prepared to do something funny. The others who shared his mindset exchanged curious glances, whispering ideas. Some talked about taking a creative selfie near the guard. Another said he wanted to test whether the guard truly never moved. The more they talked, the more they encouraged each other. They didn't notice the signs around the area, reminding visitors to behave respectfully. They didn't notice how other tourists stood politely, keeping a comfortable distance from the guards. They were too busy planning their own moment of fun. Meanwhile, the rest of the group watched nervously. They cared about each other, but they knew how unpredictable their playful friends could be. They hoped nothing embarrassing would happen. Yet they also knew that once Sam got an idea in his head, he rarely changed his mind. As they moved closer to the guards, the tourists could feel the atmosphere around them. Many people were quietly admiring the soldiers, taking photos without getting too near. A few children asked their parents questions about who the guards were and why they stood so still. There was a sense of tradition and importance in the air, something even the tourists could feel if they paid attention. But the playful ones were too amused to notice. Sam whispered, "All right, let's go closer. I want a cool picture." One of his friends nodded, raising his phone to record everything. He thought the video might get lots of views online. The idea of making others laugh excited him. Sam stepped toward the rail, smiling confidently as if he were about to perform a friendly trick. He didn't think about how inappropriate it might be. He only thought about the fun story he would tell later. His friends walked behind him, some cheering quietly, some laughing softly. They felt bold in a group, believing nothing serious would happen. They kept saying things like, "Everyone does this," and "It's just for fun." These small comments encouraged them further, even though they didn't know the real rules. A few responsible friends stayed behind, exchanging worried looks. One whispered, "This is not a good idea." But his voice was drowned out by the excitement around them. As Sam approached the guard, he could see every detail of the uniform, the polished buttons, the tall hat, the serious expression. He paused for a moment, almost in awe. The guard didn't look like a regular person standing there. He looked like a symbol of history and discipline. For a brief second, Sam considered stepping back. But then his friend whispered, "Do it. It will be funny." And just like that, Sam's hesitation disappeared. He took another step forward, smiling as if he were part of a playful challenge. He didn't know that this moment would soon turn into something none of them expected. What started as a simple idea, a harmless joke, a silly moment, was about to lead them into an experience that would change the rest of their trip and teach them a lesson they would not forget anytime soon. Sam was only a few steps away from the Royal Guard, and already, the excitement inside him was growing. His heart was racing a little faster now, but in a good way, like when you're about to do something bold and adventurous. He could already picture how funny this would look. He'd be in the center of a photo with the stern-faced guard, making a silly expression while the guard stood perfectly still. Everyone would laugh. It would be the perfect addition to their collection of vacation moments. He imagined posting the picture online, with a clever caption. Maybe something like, "How to get a smile from the Royal Guard." 80. His friends, mostly the ones who shared his sense of humor, stood behind him, urging him on. One of them, Mark, held up his phone, his fingers already ready to start recording. "I can't wait to see this," Mark whispered, a mischievous grin on his face. "Just make sure he reacts. We need the perfect shot for the gram." But there was one thing Sam didn't notice: how quiet the area had become. Other tourists were still around, but most were standing back, respectful of the guard's space. There was a hushed air of reverence around Buckingham Palace, and the tourists who had been taking photos were now standing still, just observing the guards from a distance. They were more focused on the palace itself, and the guards, with their statuesque presence, felt like a part of something bigger. Something that demanded respect, not entertainment. However, Sam was too caught up in his own plans to notice these subtleties. He had already made up his mind. "I'm going to do this," he thought to himself. "Just a quick joke. No harm done." He took a deep breath, stood a little straighter, and walked toward the guard, slowly but steadily. His footsteps were light, almost like a cat sneaking up on something. And the closer he got, the more his confidence grew. His friends followed, laughing quietly, but eager to see what would happen. The Royal Guard, standing as tall and unmoving as a statue, showed no sign of acknowledging Sam's presence. His face remained completely neutral, and his eyes were fixed straight ahead. This was exactly what Sam expected. After all, everyone knew the guards were trained to ignore distractions, no matter how strange or funny. It was part of the job, part of the tradition. But to Sam, that made the challenge even more fun. The idea that he could get the guard to react was part of what made it so entertaining. Sam took another step forward and was now standing just a couple of feet away from the guard. He could feel the heat of the summer sun on his skin and the slight breeze ruffling his shirt. But it didn't matter. This was the moment. He turned to Mark, who was still holding up the phone. "You ready?" Sam asked, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Mark nodded, adjusting the camera, excited to capture the perfect video. Then, Sam did something he thought would get the guard to break. He stood up straight, took a deep breath, and, in a playful tone, said, "Hey, Mr. Guard, bet you can't move. Come on, show us a smile." He said it loudly enough so that the guard could hear him, though not too loudly as if to be rude. Sam had never thought about how odd this might sound to anyone else around. His friends chuckled, thinking it was funny. But most of the other tourists simply turned their heads, noticing the strange interaction. For a brief moment, it felt like time slowed down. The guard didn't blink. He didn't move. His expression remained completely still, just as everyone had expected. But then, without warning, the guard did something Sam had not anticipated. In the same calm, professional tone he had been trained to use, the guard spoke. His voice was firm but not loud, with a seriousness that sent a shiver down Sam's spine. "Step back, please," the guard said, his eyes still straight ahead, his face still emotionless. Sam froze. He hadn't expected that. He had imagined the guard might stay silent, or maybe even give a small reaction, like a raised eyebrow. But this was something completely different. The warning was clear, and the tone was not playful. It was serious, almost like a parent telling a child to stop misbehaving. Sam glanced over his shoulder, his grin faltering. His friends looked at him in surprise, some of them already sensing that maybe this wasn't such a great idea after all. Mark, still holding the phone, was the first to speak up, his voice a bit quieter now. Maybe we should listen. He doesn't look like he's joking." Sam's smile faded. He turned back toward the guard, unsure of what to do next. His hands felt a little sweaty, and suddenly, he didn't feel so confident anymore. This wasn't the harmless joke he had imagined. He realized that maybe, just maybe, he had crossed a line. Before he could say anything else, the guard took another small step forward, his eyes still locked in front of him. He had been standing still, but his posture was now more alert, as though he was preparing to take action if the group didn't listen to his request. The moment stretched on for what felt like an eternity, and a heavy silence fell over the group. Everyone in the area seemed to hold their breath. A few tourists had stopped taking photos and were now watching, curious to see how the situation would unfold. Some of them had probably experienced similar moments of being too close to the guards and knew the seriousness of the situation. One of Sam's cousins, Jessica, who had been standing at the back of the group, whispered, "Let's just go. It's not worth it." Her voice was quiet but firm. She had always been the voice of reason in the group, the one who warned others when things started to get a little out of hand. Sam glanced around at his friends. They all looked a little nervous now. Even Mark, who had been the loudest in supporting the prank, lowered his phone and stepped back slowly. Sam took a deep breath and, with a sheepish look on his face, turned around to walk away from the guard. His friends followed, though some of them couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. They had come to Buckingham Palace to see the sights, to enjoy the day. And now, they were leaving with their heads down, feeling like they had made a fool of themselves. As they walked away, Sam couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort that had settled in his chest. It wasn't just the warning from the guard, it was the fact that, for the first time during their trip, they had crossed a line. They hadn't just joked with someone. They had disrespected an important part of British tradition. The Royal Guard was not there for entertainment. They were there to do a serious job, to stand watch over a piece of history, and Sam had forgotten that in the excitement of the moment. His friends were quiet as they made their way to the side of the palace, trying to pretend like it was all just part of the fun. But Sam could tell that none of them felt like laughing anymore. They had lost that light-hearted energy that had fueled their jokes earlier. Instead, there was an awkwardness in the air, and the light-heartedness they'd once shared had turned into uncertainty. As they found a quiet spot to sit down, no one said much at first, but after a few minutes, one of them, Sarah, spoke up. "We probably shouldn't have done that. It wasn't cool." Her voice was serious but not angry. Sam nodded slowly, realizing she was right. They had made a mistake not by trying to have fun, but by forgetting where they were and who they were interacting with. "Yeah," Sam said quietly. "I guess I didn't think it through. I just thought it would be funny. But I don't think it was. I really messed up." His friends didn't say much more after that, but there was a shared understanding between them. They hadn't meant any harm, but they had disrespected something important. And now, they all had to face the consequences of their actions. As Sam and his friends sat down on the edge of the palace grounds, a quiet tension hung in the air. The carefree excitement that had fueled their trip for the last few days had quickly faded. No one was speaking loudly now. Their once lively chatter had been replaced with quiet thoughts and a feeling of unease. The group had been enjoying themselves until that moment, but now, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line. Sam's mind kept replaying the guard's words. "Step back, please." The guard had spoken calmly, but the authority in his voice was undeniable. Sam hadn't realized it at the time, but the warning had felt more serious than he had anticipated. He thought it was just a minor scolding, part of the performance, like something out of a comedy. But now, with a little distance and the moment settling in, Sam felt the weight of what had just happened. They hadn't just been playful. They had disrespected someone who was doing a serious job. They had thought it was all in good fun, but now it felt more like an embarrassment. As Sam sat with his thoughts, his friends were quietly reflecting as well. Mark, who had been the most excited about recording the entire thing, was the first to speak. "I didn't expect that to happen," he admitted, rubbing his hands together nervously. "I thought the guard would just ignore us, you know. But I guess we really pushed it." "It was stupid," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly firm. "I thought it was going to be funny too. But now I just feel bad. The guards aren't there to entertain us. They're doing a job, and we treated it like a joke." Jessica, who had been one of the first to express concern, nodded in agreement. "Exactly. It's a tradition. It's part of British history. We didn't take it seriously, and that's why it feels wrong." The others nodded, but they didn't speak for a while. It felt like the group had come to a mutual understanding without saying much. They had underestimated the importance of the Royal Guard and the job they did. It wasn't about being funny or making a viral video. It was about respect, something they had failed to show in that moment. Sam sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I don't know what I was thinking. It's not like I meant to disrespect anyone. But I guess I didn't consider what it actually meant. I was just focused on the joke." He looked around at his friends, who were all sitting quietly beside him. "I feel like we embarrassed ourselves. We've been so careful on this trip, trying to enjoy everything, and then we go and do this. I mean, we're not kids anymore. We should know better." There was a moment of silence. And then Mark, who had been unusually quiet, spoke again. "We didn't mean any harm, though. We were just having fun. It was one of those, let's do something we'll laugh about later things. I don't think we realized how much of a big deal it really is. Now it feels like we were the ones who made the joke. but it's not funny anymore. Yeah, Sam agreed, rubbing his face with his hands. I guess when you think about it, we've all seen those clips online where tourists mess with the guards, and everyone laughs about it. We thought we'd be part of the joke, but we didn't stop to think about the bigger picture. Sarah, who had been quiet for a while, looked up. It's a tradition, you know. People come from all over the world to see the guards, and they stand there for hours, doing their job, no matter what happens around them. I'm sure they get tired of being treated like a joke all the time. And we were no different. True, Jessica added. When you see the guards standing there, looking all serious, you don't really think about how much effort goes into what they do. They don't just stand still for fun. They're guarding the palace, protecting something that's been around for centuries. I guess we just saw them as part of the tourist experience, not as someone doing a real job. The group sat in silence again, the weight of their actions hanging heavy in the air. They had been tourists, part of the very crowd that flocked to Buckingham Palace to get a picture with the royal guard, to be part of the tradition without understanding it fully. Now, they realized, they had failed to appreciate the deeper meaning behind it. They had been disrespectful, and that realization stung. Sam's mind was racing. He couldn't help but wonder if the guard had felt insulted. He imagined how it might feel to stand for hours, surrounded by people who saw him only as a part of the show. A prop in a tourist attraction. The thought made Sam uncomfortable. He realized that he had been thoughtless, assuming that the guards were there simply for people's entertainment, without recognizing the seriousness of their role. After a long pause, Mark looked at Sam. What do you think we should do now? I mean, it's not like we can go back and undo it. It happened. Sam nodded slowly. Yeah. But I think we should at least apologize. I mean, it's the right thing to do. I don't know how we'd even begin to apologize. But we should at least try. We're here as guests in another country, and we should show respect for their traditions. The others agreed. Though it was awkward and uncomfortable, they knew that taking responsibility for their actions was important. Apologizing would be the first step in making things right. But none of them were sure how they could even approach it. They didn't want to make things worse or seem insincere, but they also didn't want to let the incident slide without acknowledging it. What if we go to the guard's post and just say we're sorry? Jessica suggested. Not to make a scene, but just quietly. Maybe we can leave a note or something. It's not a huge thing, but at least it would show we understand what we did wrong. The others thought for a moment. The idea of doing something simple, but meaningful, seemed like the best way to approach the situation. They didn't want to draw more attention to their mistake, but they also wanted to show that they were serious about their apology. I think that's a good idea, Sam said finally. We don't need to make it a big deal. We just need to show that we understand why it was wrong, and that we're sorry for what we did. So, after a brief discussion, the group agreed to approach the Royal Guard's post. They didn't know exactly what they would say, but they wanted to show respect. They stood up, gathering their things, and made their way toward the area where the guards stood. This time, they walked more carefully, with their heads a little lower. The weight of the past few minutes on their minds. As they reached the edge of the area, Sam stopped. He looked at the other tourists around them, all of them quietly admiring the guards. He could see now how much people appreciated the solemnity and significance of the moment. And with that realization came the understanding that the Royal Guard's job wasn't just about standing still, it was about tradition, history, and respect. The group stood there for a few moments, silently acknowledging what they had learned. Then, without speaking another word, they began to leave the area. No one spoke of the apology they hadn't made yet. They knew that, for now, their actions would speak louder than any words. As they slowly walked away from the area where the Royal Guard stood, a sense of discomfort still hung in the air. The group had planned their trip to London to experience the excitement of seeing the famous sights, to explore, laugh, and make memories. But now, They were quietly reflecting on a situation that had left them feeling embarrassed and unsure. They had come to Buckingham Palace to witness a historic tradition, but instead, they had unintentionally disrupted it, and the weight of their actions was still lingering. They didn't know how to fix what had happened. The guard's warning, so calm yet firm, echoed in Sam's mind, and he couldn't help but wonder if their behavior had hurt more than just the formality of the situation. Had they disrespected the tradition, or worse, the people who took that tradition seriously? The more Sam thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't just about the joke. It was about how they had failed to consider the context in which they were acting. They were in a place of great historical significance, and they had treated it like a casual tourist attraction, with no regard for the deeper meaning behind the guard's role. "We definitely messed up," Sam said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice wasn't filled with anger or frustration, just a quiet sense of regret. "I don't know why I thought it would be funny. It was one of those things where, in the moment, it seemed like a good idea. But now, I just feel bad about it." His friends nodded in agreement, each of them reflecting on the situation in their own way. They had all shared in the excitement and the laughter, but now they could all see that it hadn't been as harmless as they had originally thought. Mark, who had been the one most excited about capturing the moment on his phone, had put it away the moment things started to feel wrong. He didn't say much at first, but his eyes gave away his feelings. He, too, had been caught up in the idea of creating a viral moment, but now he realized that they hadn't just embarrassed themselves. They had taken something important and turned it into a joke, without even understanding what it meant to those who worked to protect and maintain the traditions of Buckingham Palace. "Maybe we should have thought more before doing anything," Mark said, looking down at his shoes. "I mean, I get it. The whole idea of messing with the guard is kind of a joke in itself, but we didn't think about what we were really doing. It wasn't funny anymore when we saw the way he reacted. It felt like we crossed a line." Tevity, Jessica, who had been quiet for most of the walk, spoke up. "It's not just the guard we disrespected. It's the whole tradition. It's not about making someone react or getting a picture for our social media. It's about what the guards represent, the history, the pride, the seriousness of their job. It's something that's been around for centuries, and we didn't take it seriously." Ended 1. 2. End. 2. Ended. Sam glanced at Jessica, impressed by her insight. He hadn't really thought about it from that perspective. To him, the Royal Guard had always been a symbol of British tradition. But he hadn't fully grasped how much weight that tradition carried. It wasn't just about standing still and looking impressive. It was about the commitment to a role that had been passed down for generations, something that was much more than just a tourist attraction. "You're right," Sam said, his voice a little heavier now. "I guess I just thought of the guards as something you see in movies or online. I never really thought about what they actually stand for. I didn't take a moment to think about the respect they deserve for their job." The group continued walking in silence, each of them processing the events in their own way. They passed by other tourists, who were still posing for photos, some of them standing near the guards, others snapping pictures of the palace. But now, Sam and his friends couldn't shake the feeling that they were in the wrong. The laughter and lightheartedness that had defined their trip earlier were replaced by a sense of discomfort. "We can't go back and change what happened," Sarah said, her voice calm but serious. "But we can learn from it. We've seen the reaction, and we know now that we should have respected the tradition from the start." The guard wasn't just doing his job. He was preserving a part of history that we weren't aware of, and we didn't give it the respect it deserved. The group had come to a quiet understanding. They had acted impulsively, without considering the consequences, and now they had to take responsibility for their actions. But there was still that lingering feeling of unease. What could they do to make things right? The damage had already been done, but maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to at least acknowledge their mistake. Sam thought about it for a moment, then spoke up again. Maybe we can do something small to show that we understand. We don't have to make a big deal out of it, but we could at least try to make it right. I think we should. Jessica agreed. Maybe we can visit the guard's post again and just stand there quietly for a moment, just to show our respect. I know it might not be enough, but it's a small gesture. At least, it's something. The idea was simple but meaningful. Sam and his friends didn't know if it would make up for the disrespect they had shown, but it felt like the right thing to do. They didn't want to draw attention to themselves, but they did want to show that they had learned something from the experience. It wasn't just about saying sorry. It was about taking the time to understand why their behavior had been wrong and how they could approach it differently in the future. They made their way back toward the area where the royal guards were stationed, walking at a slower pace this time, more mindful of their surroundings. The atmosphere felt different now. The crowds of tourists were still there, snapping photos and chatting, but Sam and his friends couldn't ignore the significance of the place. It wasn't just a tourist stop. It was a piece of history, something that connected the past to the present. The guards weren't just standing there for show. They were part of a long-standing tradition that had been carried out for centuries. As they approached the area near the palace, they didn't speak much. Each of them knew what they had to do. They walked past the crowd of tourists and approached the guards once more. They didn't go up to them directly, but instead stood at a respectful distance, just observing. They didn't try to get closer or make any jokes. They simply stood still, like everyone else, watching the guards as they continued their duty. For a moment, it felt like the world around them slowed down. They stood there in silence, each person reflecting on what they had learned and how they had changed in the last few hours. It wasn't about grand gestures or loud apologies. It was about taking the time to show respect, to recognize the importance of the tradition, and to silently acknowledge the mistake they had made. Sam glanced over at his friends, and they all nodded to one another. They didn't need to speak. The shared understanding was enough. They didn't need to fix everything all at once. But in that quiet moment, they were beginning to make things right in their own way. As they stood there, quietly observing the royal guards at Buckingham Palace, Sam and his friends couldn't help but feel a sense of calm slowly replacing the discomfort they had felt earlier. It wasn't as though standing there was some grand act of apology, but it felt like the right step to make. They didn't need to draw attention to themselves. They didn't need to shout out an apology or try to fix things with big gestures. Instead, they just stood still, watching and learning. Sam felt a slight weight lift off his chest as he watched the guards maintain their solemn post. There was something powerful about the way they stood, unwavering, calm, and disciplined, as if they had been trained for this moment for their entire lives. The tourists around him continued taking pictures and posing with the guards, but for Sam, this time, the experience felt different. It wasn't about trying to get the perfect photo or make a joke. It was about understanding what the guards represented and the history they upheld. "Do you think the guard noticed us?" Mark asked quietly, his eyes focused on the guard standing closest to them. Sam shrugged, unsure. He didn't know if the guard had noticed them standing there, or if he had even thought about their earlier behavior. But in a way, that didn't matter. What mattered now was that they were making a conscious effort to show respect. They weren't trying to make it right with a quick apology, they were doing it with their actions. By recognizing the importance of the tradition they had disrespected. "I don't know," Sam replied. "But I think what we're doing right now matters more than anything we could say. Just standing here, taking it all in, it feels like the right thing to do." The rest of the group nodded in agreement. They hadn't spoken much since they first arrived back at the palace grounds, but the quiet shared understanding between them was clear. No one had to explain themselves. They all knew that the joke they had played had been wrong. It wasn't just about making light of the guard's serious role, it was about disregarding the history and the pride that came with his position. It was something they hadn't fully appreciated until now. Sarah glanced at the other tourists who were still chatting and laughing nearby. Some were taking selfies with the guards, and others were marveling at the grandeur of the palace. The atmosphere felt completely different to her now. What had once felt like a fun adventure now felt more like a reminder of the importance of respect and understanding. "It's strange," Sarah said, after a long pause. "But I feel like I've learned something today. I thought I understood what it meant to visit these kinds of historic places, but I didn't really get it until now." "I think we all learned something," Jessica said softly. "It's easy to get caught up in the fun and forget that places like Buckingham Palace aren't just tourist spots. They represent something much bigger. We should have understood that from the beginning." As they stood there, lost in their thoughts, Sam glanced at his phone, which had been buzzing in his pocket for a while. He pulled it out and saw a few messages from friends back home. He had a moment of hesitation before deciding to check them. Most of the messages were the usual updates about what his friends were up to. But one stood out. It was a video that one of the tourists had posted online, a video of Sam's group interacting with the royal guard. Sam had forgotten about the video, but it had already gone viral, shared by hundreds of people in a matter of hours. The comments ranged from amused to critical. Some people found it funny, others thought it was disrespectful, and a few even mentioned how it was typical of tourists who didn't know any better. Seeing the video reminded Sam of how they had been laughed at by strangers online, how their moment of mischief had turned into something they regretted. But it also made him realize that the video wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that they had acted thoughtlessly and had not considered the full impact of their behavior. As he scrolled through the comments, Sam felt a mixture of embarrassment and resolve. He could feel the weight of the criticism, but he also knew that they couldn't change what had happened. The only thing they could do was take responsibility, learn from the experience, and move forward with more awareness. "I guess we're famous now," Mark said with a small laugh, breaking the silence. He had also seen the video and the flood of messages that followed. "Not for the reasons we wanted, though." "I don't care about the video," Sam said, shaking his head. "It's the fact that we weren't paying attention to what was right in front of us. We were so busy trying to have fun that we missed the bigger picture. The guard, the palace, the history, it all mattered, and we didn't respect that. I think we can still make it right," Jessica said, her voice steady. "We might have made a mistake, but that doesn't mean we can't change. We just need to show more respect in the future and learn from what happened today." Sam smiled at her, grateful for her calm perspective. "You're right. We can't fix everything, but we can do better." They all stood there for a few more minutes, quietly observing the guards and reflecting on the lesson they had learned. As they watched, a new sense of respect began to settle in. They didn't need to explain themselves to the world or try to undo their past actions. The most important thing was that they had recognized their mistake, and that was the first step toward understanding the true value of the traditions they had encountered during their travels. As they finally turned to leave, they walked with a sense of peace. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and it didn't erase the embarrassment they had felt, but it felt like they had taken responsibility for their actions. They had learned something important about the value of respect, history, and tradition. They didn't need to make a grand statement to the world. They just needed to carry the lesson forward and make sure that their future actions would be guided by a deeper understanding of the places they visited and the people they encountered. "We've got the rest of the trip ahead of us," Sam said as they walked back toward the entrance of the palace. "Let's make sure we show respect everywhere we go. We don't need to make the same mistake again." The others nodded in agreement. They had learned their lesson, and now it was time to carry it with them. They might have started their journey in London with excitement and laughter, but they were leaving with something much more valuable: a deeper understanding of the importance of respect, history, and awareness. As they left Buckingham Palace behind, Sam and his friends felt a new sense of purpose. They had experienced the consequences of thoughtless behavior, but they had also found a way to make it right, not by apologizing to the world, but by changing the way they approached their travels and their interactions with the world around them. They didn't know what the rest of their trip would hold, but they knew one thing for sure. They would carry the lessons they had learned from the Royal Guard with them for the rest of their lives.